It was supposed to be a quiet evening between friends, just a simple night to unwind, share some drinks, and talk about life. But somewhere between the laughter and the confessions, something shifted. What started as a harmless conversation soon grew heavier, and before either of us knew it, the night had taken a turn. We didn't see it coming, but in that moment, a line was crossed. And once it was crossed, there was no going back. What happened that night? That's a story I can barely bring myself to tell. But it's one you need to hear, because some boundaries, once broken, stay broken forever. Maya was in her late 20s, a woman who, on the outside, seemed to have it all. A nice home, a steady job, a marriage to a man who was everything society told her she should want. But behind closed doors, things were different. Her marriage, once filled with passion and laughter, had settled into a hollow routine. The spark had long since faded, replaced by silence and distance. It wasn't that her husband didn't love her, he did. But somewhere along the way, they both stopped trying. And in that emptiness, Maya found herself searching for anything to fill the void. But no matter how much she gave, it was never enough. Sarah had always been Maya's rock, the one person she could count on to listen when everything else felt overwhelming. They'd shared everything over the years: dreams, fears, laughter, and tears. But that night, there was something about Sarah that was different. The way she looked at Maya, the way her voice wavered, like she was carrying a secret of her own. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A certain vulnerability hung in the air between them, making everything feel more than just a friendly conversation. Sarah wasn't just a friend anymore. That night, she would become something far more complicated. As the wine flowed and the night wore on, the conversation began to shift, slipping from lighthearted chatter to something more raw, more vulnerable. The hours passed in a blur, and soon the walls between them started to break down. Maya's usual cheerful demeanor had faded, replaced by something deeper, something she rarely showed anyone. She began to talk about her marriage, how, despite everything she thought she wanted, it had become a suffocating routine. Her voice trembled ever so slightly as she admitted her loneliness, how every day felt like she was living alongside someone, but never truly with them. She spoke of the emptiness she carried with her, a burden too heavy to bear. It was a side of her that Sarah hadn't seen in years, maybe never. The walls that Maya had built around herself, to protect her from everything she feared losing, seemed to crumble in the presence of her best friend. There was no hiding now, no pretending. Maya needed to say it out loud to release the pain that had been quietly consuming her. And Sarah, who had always been the listener, now found herself watching Maya in a way she never had before. Her friend wasn't just hurt, she was desperate for something more, something beyond the life she had settled for. Sarah leaned in slightly, her eyes narrowing as she studied Maya, as if seeing her in a way that was almost too intimate. She had always known Maya to be strong, to keep it together. But tonight, Maya wasn't keeping anything together. And that vulnerability? That was all Sarah needed. "You deserve more than this, Maya," Sarah said, her voice low but firm. "You deserve to feel alive again. You can't keep hiding in this cage." The words were like a key unlocking something inside Maya, and before she could stop herself, Maya felt a stirring deep within her, a longing to break free, to give in to the very desire she had buried for so long. And just like that, Sarah's words had shifted something in the air between them. The room felt charged, heavy with an energy neither woman could ignore. "Why settle for less?" Sarah continued, her voice almost coaxing now. "You could have more, Maya. You deserve it." It wasn't just a conversation anymore, it was a turning point, one that neither of them could have anticipated. They both knew it then, in that moment. The direction of their night had changed forever. What was once a harmless conversation about a broken marriage had taken a dangerous turn, and neither of them would ever be the same again. One minute they were laughing, lost in the warmth of the evening, two friends, sharing old memories and venting about life's frustrations, the comfort of each other's company filling the silence. The drinks flowed easily, and with each sip, the weight of the world seemed to slip away. But then, somewhere between the jokes and the stories, something changed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it was there. The alcohol, once a soothing balm, had started to blur the edges of their thoughts. It made them bolder, braver in ways they hadn't planned. The space between them shrank, and suddenly, what had felt like an innocent night between old friends began to feel different. The lines between right and wrong, playful and dangerous, began to fade into the background. The conversation shifted, a dare here, a challenge their small, seemingly harmless games. But with every passing moment, the dares became more daring. It was no longer just about silly, trivial things. The air was thick with something unspoken, an energy neither woman could deny. Maya, usually the more cautious one, found herself giving in, laughing a little too loudly at things that weren't funny, leaning a little too close to Sarah, her gaze lingering longer than it should. Sarah, on the other hand, had always been the more adventurous one, but tonight there was something about her, something that made her push just a little harder. The teasing became flirtation, the proximity more intimate. Neither of them could tell exactly when it happened, but at some point, the distance that had always been there between them evaporated, leaving something that felt raw and unfiltered. The dog, who had been quietly lying by the door, watching them with disinterested eyes, suddenly broke the tension. It was a small, almost comical interruption, but in that moment it felt like anything but. The animal's sudden movement seemed to add to the chaos of the night. The room felt smaller, hotter, as if the air itself was thick with something dangerous. What had begun as innocent fun was now spiraling out of control, and neither woman seemed able or willing to stop it. The boundaries that had once defined their friendship were now invisible, lost somewhere between the games and the glances, the laughter and the silence. And then, just like that, everything changed. The moments of confusion, the misplaced touches, the laughs that were a little too hard, all began to blur together. In the haze of alcohol and emotions, neither of them could piece together exactly what had happened, but the weight of it pressed down on them with a suffocating force. It was like waking up from a dream or maybe a nightmare and not being able to remember the details, but knowing that something had shifted irrevocably. They both lay there, staring at each other, disoriented, their minds struggling to grasp the reality of what had just unfolded. The room, once full of energy, was now thick with the quiet aftermath of what had happened. The dog, once the innocent bystander, now seemed to be a lingering reminder of the chaos that had ensued. The questions lingered in the air between them. What had they done? What had started as a simple night of confessions had evolved into something neither could have imagined, something they were both now too afraid to acknowledge. The weight of their actions hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. The fog of the night had lifted, but the consequences were just beginning to take shape. And as they stared at each other, the reality of what they had done was clear. They had crossed a line, and now they would have to live with the consequences. The morning after brought nothing but silence. The weight of the night before hung in the air like a thick fog neither woman could shake. They both woke in the same place, the same room, but everything felt different now. There was no comfort, no warmth, only an overwhelming sense of confusion, shame, and guilt. Their bodies ached, but it was their souls that felt heavy, burdened by an undeniable truth they couldn't escape. Neither woman could bring herself to speak, their eyes avoiding each other, both too afraid of what they might see. The quiet between them was suffocating. The more they tried to piece together the fragments of the previous night, the more elusive the details became. All they knew for sure was that something had happened, something they couldn't take back. But neither could remember exactly how or why it happened. The events of the night were like a puzzle, the pieces scattered across their memories, half-formed and impossible to put together. Maya lay in bed, her mind racing, each thought darker than the last. She couldn't stop thinking about what had transpired. How had it gone so far? And why hadn't she stopped it when she still could? But what troubled her most, what gnawed at her, was the thought of her husband. He was so far removed from this secret, so unaware of the darkness that had unfolded in their home. The guilt was suffocating. How could she ever face him again, knowing that she had crossed a line that no marriage should ever have to face? Maya's heart pounded as she wondered how she could keep this hidden from him, how to pretend nothing had changed when everything had. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, making every breath feel like a betrayal. How could she look at her husband and act like nothing was wrong, knowing the truth lay heavy between her and Sarah? As she lay there, staring at the ceiling, Maya realized she had to face Sarah. There was no running from it. The bond they had shared, the friendship they had built over years, now felt fragile enough to break at any moment. How could they move forward after this? Could they ever go back to the way things were? Could they pretend, or was the silence between them now too loud to ignore? Maya's mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. She knew she needed to talk to Sarah, to confront what had happened, but the fear of what that might mean terrified her. Would the friendship survive? Or was this the end of something much deeper than a simple mistake? The silence in the room felt deafening as both women lay there, not daring to speak, the horror of what had unfolded still hanging between them, unspoken. The burden of what had been done seemed insurmountable, and as Maya tried to make sense of it all, she couldn't escape the question that haunted her: could they ever go back to being friends after this? Or had they crossed a line that no apology could ever erase? Maya's mind raced, each thought a jagged blade cutting deeper into her soul. She couldn't escape the weight of her actions, the constant echo of what had transpired. At first, it felt like a fleeting mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. But as the hours passed and the fog of alcohol cleared, the truth became undeniable. Maya hadn't just betrayed her husband. She had betrayed herself. The person she thought she was, the woman who once believed in loyalty, in love and something pure, had vanished. What remained was a stranger, someone she didn't recognize, someone capable of making choices that no amount of regret could undo. She had let herself believe that she deserved something more, something different, something that would fill the emptiness inside her. But what she had found, what she had done, was nothing like what she had imagined. Now, she couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of loss, not just the loss of trust from the man she loved, but the loss of herself. She found herself questioning everything, the choices she had made, the life she had built, and whether she could ever repair the damage she had caused. It wasn't just about her husband anymore. It was about the person she had become, the things she had done. Was this who she really was? Or had the woman she thought she was just been a mask for all the pain and dissatisfaction she'd kept hidden for so long? Maya couldn't answer those questions, and the not knowing tore at her, filling her chest with a cold, aching emptiness. Across the room, Sarah sat in silence, her mind spinning just as wildly. The night had started as an innocent ape, a way for two friends to reconnect. But now, in the wake of their actions, everything felt wrong. The regret gnawed at her, just as deeply as it gnawed at Maya. How had it come to this? What had driven them both to cross a line that could never be erased? Sarah had always known that Maya was struggling, that she was searching for something, anything to fill the void in her life. But she hadn't expected it to lead to this, to them, to this moment of darkness. Was it the alcohol? Was it the emotional tension between them? Or was it something deeper, something more dangerous that neither of them had seen coming? Sarah couldn't stop the questions from flooding her mind. What had pushed them both to make choices they would never be able to take back? Was it the alcohol, as they had both blamed it for so many things? Or was it something more, a shared moment of vulnerability, a need for connection that had grown too intense to ignore? And now, how could she face Maya after everything? How could they continue their friendship when they were both carrying the weight of a secret so dark? And more than that, how could they live with what they had done, knowing it could never be undone? The silence between them grew thick and suffocating. What had once been an easy, effortless friendship now felt like a chasm neither of them could cross. Maya sat on one end of the room, her eyes fixed on the floor, her thoughts swirling in a fog of regret. Sarah, sitting just across from her, mirrored her in every way, avoiding eye contact, her hands fidgeting nervously. It was as though everything they had once shared had been stripped away, leaving nothing but a painful awareness of the irreversible truth between them. The night that was supposed to liberate them, to offer a moment of escape, had turned into a dark, unshakable prison, trapping them both in its aftermath. It was no longer just about what they had done, it was about what they couldn't undo. No matter how hard they tried to move past it, the weight of that night clung to them like a shadow, darker and heavier with every passing second. They say some secrets are too heavy to carry alone. But what if the person who shared them with you becomes the one you can never face again? The connection they had once shared was now marred by a truth so ugly it threatened to tear them apart. Maya felt her chest tighten with every breath. She had tried to hold on to the belief that they could work through it, that this would just be a painful memory they could laugh about someday. But now, the thought of returning to normalcy felt like a lie, a cruel, hollow pretense. Could they ever truly forgive each other or themselves? And even if they could they ever go back to being the friends they once were? Maya glanced at Sarah for a brief moment, but there was no comfort in that gaze, no reassurance. There was nothing left to say. Nothing left to fix. But in the back of Maya's mind, a more terrifying thought lingered. She still hadn't confessed to her husband. The lie, the guilt, the weight of her secret, it all felt like an impending storm. Would she ever tell him? Or would the shame swallow her whole, leaving nothing but a life filled with lies? Sarah, too, was lost in her own turmoil. She knew that what they had done was unforgivable. But would she walk away? Could she live with the weight of it all, knowing that Maya's betrayal had cost them both more than just a friendship? Or was it already too late for them to walk away from each other, trapped forever in the wreckage of a single night? The questions hung between them, unanswered, as the minutes dragged on in unbearable silence. In the end, could anything fix what they'd broken? Or would their friendship and their lives be shattered beyond repair? Could they escape the ghosts of that night, or would they remain haunted forever? What would you do if you were in their shoes? Could you ever recover from crossing a line like that? What if the guilt was too heavy to carry? The trust broken beyond repair? The relationships destroyed? Could you ever move on, or would it haunt you forever? Let us know your thoughts below. Share your experiences, your questions, and your reflections. We want to hear what you think, because sometimes the most painful stories can teach us the most about ourselves.